My name is Jessica Martinez. I'm 28 years old, and I never thought my Harvard Business School classmates would mock me for living paycheck to paycheck at our reunion. But when Forbes called to confirm my position as the youngest female CEO of a Fortune 500 company, their laughter died in the most spectacular way imaginable. Let me take you back to the beginning of the story. Because what happened at my Harvard Business School reunion was the culmination of 5 years of strategic invisibility that allowed me to build something extraordinary while everyone around me assumed I was failing. I'm Jessica Martinez, and for the past 5 years, I've been living the ultimate double life in corporate America. To my former classmates, friends, and even family, I'm the Harvard MBA who wasted her potential by taking a low-level operations job at some obscure company called Meridian Technologies, living in a tiny studio apartment and struggling to make ends meet in expensive San Francisco. The reality is infinitely more complex and dramatically more successful. What nobody knows is that I don't just work at Meridian Technologies. I founded it 5 years ago and have been serving as its CEO since day one. The company that my classmates think barely pays me enough to survive has grown from my $50,000 in savings to a $3.2 billion technology powerhouse that revolutionized supply chain management for Fortune 500 companies worldwide. The deception was both necessary and strategic. When I graduated from Harvard at 23, I had a choice: join an established tech company and climb the traditional corporate ladder, or bet everything on my revolutionary logistics algorithm and risk total failure. I chose the riskier path, but I knew that being a 23-year-old female CEO would invite scrutiny, skepticism, and potentially dangerous attention from competitors. So I created the perfect cover story: Jessica Martinez, the idealistic Harvard grad who took an operations coordinator position at a small tech startup because she wanted to make a difference rather than chase money. I rented a modest studio apartment, drove a used Toyota Camry, and lived on a deliberately modest salary while reinvesting every penny of profit back into the company. For 5 years, I endured the pity, the condescending career advice, and the constant suggestions that I should get serious and find a real job at an established company. My Harvard classmates, who had gone on to Goldman Sachs, McKinsey, and other prestigious firms, treated me like a cautionary tale about the dangers of idealism over pragmatism. The irony was exquisite. While they were making six-figure salaries as junior analysts and associates, I was building a company that would eventually employ over 2,000 people and generate revenues that dwarfed their entire firm's quarterly earnings. But maintaining the deception required constant vigilance and sacrifice. I couldn't live in the penthouse apartment I could afford, couldn't drive the car I wanted, couldn't wear the clothes that matched my actual net worth. Every aspect of my life had to be consistent with the struggling startup employee persona I had created. The Harvard Business School 5-year reunion was held at the Fairmont Hotel in San Francisco, an elegant venue that perfectly matched my classmates' elevated expectations of where their careers should have taken them by now. The invitation had arrived 3 months earlier, along with the usual reunion questionnaire asking for updates on career achievements, family status, and personal milestones. I had filled it out truthfully but misleadingly, currently working in operations at Meridian Technologies, a logistics software company in San Francisco, focusing on supply chain optimization and process improvement. To anyone reading that, it sounded like exactly what it was designed to sound like: a modest operations job at a small tech company that probably paid around $75,000 a year. The reunion cocktail reception was everything I remembered about Harvard Business School social events: expensive suits, designer dresses, and conversations that were barely disguised competitions about career success and financial achievement. I arrived wearing exactly what my cover identity demanded: a simple black dress from Banana Republic, basic shoes, and the slightly overwhelmed expression of someone who clearly couldn't afford to be competing with her more successful classmates. The effect was immediate and predictable. My former study group spotted me within minutes and surrounded me with the kind of enthusiastic greeting that barely concealed their pity. "Jessica, oh my God, look at you," said Madison Wells, who had become a vice president at Goldman Sachs. "You look exactly the same as you did in business school." The emphasis on exactly the same was clearly meant to highlight that while everyone else had evolved into polished corporate executives, I had remained static. "Hi, Madison," I replied, playing my role perfectly. "Congratulations on the VP promotion. I saw the announcement on LinkedIn." "Thank you. It's been an incredible journey," she said, then immediately pivoted to what she clearly considered the more interesting topic. "So tell us about, what was it? Meridian Technologies? Are you still doing operations work there?" The group gathered closer, like anthropologists studying a fascinating specimen of career stagnation. "I am," I said simply. "Still working on supply chain optimization." "That's so admirable," said Christopher Park, who had joined McKinsey as a consultant and was now a partner. "Staying loyal to a small company, focusing on the work itself rather than climbing the ladder. Very principled." The condescension was thick enough to cut with a knife. "How many employees does Meridian have?" asked Sarah Chin, who had gone into private equity and was now managing director at a major fund. "About 2,000, I replied truthfully. "Oh, that's bigger than I expected," she said, clearly recalculating her assessment. "Still, supply chain work must be challenging, financially." "We manage," I said, maintaining the fiction perfectly. That's when Marcus Rodriguez, who had become a senior director at Apple, decided to get more direct with his inquiry. "Jessica, don't take this the wrong way, but are you happy? I mean, really happy with how things have turned out? Because you were one of the smartest people in our class, and sometimes I wonder if you're reaching your potential." The group nodded sympathetically, clearly concerned about my apparent waste of Harvard Business School training. "I mean," Madison added, "you could probably get a great position at any major consulting firm or tech company. Have you considered making a move? I could introduce you to people." "Poor Jessica lives paycheck to paycheck," laughed Christopher, apparently thinking this was hilarious rather than cruel. "While we're all building wealth and climbing corporate ladders, she's still in the same entry-level operations job she took right out of business school." The group erupted in laughter that was meant to be good-natured, but felt more like mockery of my supposed lack of ambition and financial success. "It's like she's frozen in time," Sarah added with fake concern. "Still living like a recent graduate instead of a Harvard MBA with 5 years of experience." "Have you considered that maybe operations isn't your calling?" Marcus suggested helpfully. "I could probably get you an interview for a program manager position at Apple. The pay would be much better than whatever small startup salary you're making now." The irony was so perfect it was almost painful. The small startup salary they were pitying me for was actually zero, because I took no salary as CEO, choosing instead to reinvest everything back into the company that was now worth more than most of their employers' market caps. That's when my phone rang with a call that would change everything. I normally would never answer during a social event, but the caller ID showed Forbes magazine, and I knew they had been trying to reach me for weeks about their annual 30 Under 30 feature. "Excuse me," I said, stepping away from the group. "I should take this." "Ms. Martinez," came the professional voice of a Forbes journalist. "This is David Chen from Forbes. I apologize for calling on a weekend, but we're finalizing our cover story about young tech CEOs, and we need to confirm some details about Meridian Technologies." I could feel my former classmates watching me curiously as I took the call, probably wondering why anyone from a major publication would be calling the Paycheck to Paycheck operations coordinator. "What kind of details?" I asked, knowing that my 5-year secret was about to explode in the most public way possible. "Well, we want to make sure we have your title correct for the article. You are the founder and CEO of Meridian Technologies, correct? And the company's current valuation is approximately $3.2 billion. The silence from my former classmates was immediate and complete. Even in the noisy cocktail reception, they could clearly hear every word of the Forbes journalist's questions. "That's correct," I replied professionally, watching my classmates' faces cycle through confusion, disbelief, and dawning horror. "Excellent," the journalist continued, his voice carrying clearly in the suddenly quiet space around our group. "And you're currently 28 years old, making you the youngest female CEO of a Fortune 500 company, is that right?" Madison's champagne glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the marble floor. "Yes, that's accurate," I confirmed, meeting the stunned stares of my former classmates. Perfect. The article will be published Monday morning with the headline, "The Invisible CEO: How 28-year-old Jessica Martinez Built a $3.2 billion empire while nobody was watching." We'll need a photo shoot tomorrow if possible. I hung up and looked around at the group of people who had just finished mocking me for living paycheck to paycheck and being frozen in time at an entry-level operations job. Christopher found his voice first, though it came out as a weak whisper. "Jessica, did that person just say you're the CEO of a $3.2 billion company?" Before I could answer, Sarah's phone chimed with a news alert. She looked at the screen and her face went completely white. Meridian Technologies CEO Jessica Martinez named to Fortune 500, she read aloud in a stunned voice. Company revenues exceed $1.8 billion annually, revolutionizing supply chain management for major corporations worldwide. The cocktail reception around us had begun to take notice of the commotion. Other reunion attendees were pulling out phones, frantically Googling my name and Meridian Technologies, trying to understand how the woman they'd all assumed was a failure had somehow become one of the most successful CEOs in America. Marcus was scrolling through his phone with desperate intensity. "It says here that Meridian Technologies has partnerships with Amazon, Walmart, and Target. You've revolutionized logistics for half the Fortune 500. The company went public last year," Madison read from her phone, her voice getting higher with each fact. "IPO valued at $2.8 billion. Current market cap $3.2 billion. Jessica Martinez owns 47% of the company." The mathematics was sinking in for my former classmates. If I owned 47% of a $3.2 billion company, my personal net worth was approximately $1.5 billion. Sarah looked up from her phone with an expression of complete bewilderment. "Jessica, you're a billionaire. You're not living paycheck to paycheck. You're worth more than all of us combined." "Significantly more," I confirmed calmly. Christopher was still reading from his phone. "It says here that you founded the company 5 years ago, right after graduating from Harvard Business School. You've been the CEO the entire time." "That's correct," I said. "The operations coordinator position you all knew about was my cover story. I needed to build the company without the scrutiny that comes with being a 23-year-old female CEO in Silicon Valley." The revelation was spreading through the cocktail reception like wildfire. Other classmates were approaching our group, phones in hand, all trying to understand how Jessica Martinez, the woman they'd all written off as an underachiever, had secretly become one of the most successful entrepreneurs of their generation. Madison finally found her voice, though it came out as a desperate whisper. But you live in that tiny apartment. You drive that old Toyota. You dress like someone who makes $75,000 a year instead of someone who's worth $1.5 billion," I finished. Yes, that was intentional. I needed to maintain operational security while building the company. "Operational security?" Marcus repeated weakly. "When you're disrupting entrenched industries and threatening established players, anonymity is a competitive advantage," I explained. "My competitors never saw me coming because they never took a 23-year-old seriously enough to notice what I was building." The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the group. While they had been climbing traditional corporate ladders and celebrating six-figure salaries, I had been building something that made their achievements look like footnotes. Sarah was still staring at her phone. "The Forbes article mentions that you've revolutionized supply chain management using AI and machine learning. Companies using Meridian software have reduced logistics costs by an average of 34%. "That's the low end," I said simply. "Some clients have seen reductions of over 50%. Christopher looked like he was having an existential crisis. "So when you said you were working on supply chain optimization?" "I was telling the truth," I replied. "I just didn't mention that I was doing it as the CEO of a Fortune 500 company that I had built from scratch." The cocktail reception had essentially stopped functioning as a social event. Every conversation in the room was now focused on the revelation that Jessica Martinez, the woman they'd all assumed was the least successful graduate in their class, was actually the most successful entrepreneur any of them had ever met. Madison made one desperate attempt at damage control. "Jessica, You have to understand, we were just concerned about you. We thought you were struggling. You thought I was failing, I corrected gently. And instead of offering genuine support or trying to understand my choices, you used my supposed failure to make yourselves feel superior about your own career paths. Marcus tried to interject. We didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't ask the right questions, I replied. You assumed that because my lifestyle didn't match your expectations of success, I must be unsuccessful. You never considered that I might have reasons for living modestly. The Harvard Business School dean, who had been mingling with alumni throughout the reception, approached our group with obvious excitement. Ms. Martinez, he said enthusiastically, I just heard the wonderful news about the Forbes article. Harvard Business School is so proud to have produced the youngest female Fortune 500 CEO in history. The public validation from the dean in front of my former classmates was the perfect punctuation mark to the evening's revelations. Thank you, Dean Morrison, I replied professionally. Harvard provided an excellent foundation for entrepreneurship. I hope you'll consider guest lecturing in our entrepreneurship program, he continued. Our students would be incredibly inspired by your story. As the dean walked away, I looked around at my former classmates who were still processing the magnitude of their misjudgment. The funny thing is, I said quietly, I really was living paycheck to paycheck because I chose to reinvest every dollar of profit back into the company instead of paying myself a salary. But that's very different from being unsuccessful. Over the following days, the Forbes article made international headlines. The story of the invisible CEO who had built a billion-dollar empire while living like a struggling startup employee became a sensation in business media. My former classmates found themselves fielding calls from reporters who wanted to know what it was like to have gone to business school with a secret billionaire. The video someone had taken of Christopher laughing about me living paycheck to paycheck went viral, becoming a cautionary tale about assumptions and the true nature of success. But the most satisfying part wasn't their embarrassment or the media attention. It was finally being able to live openly as the person I had actually become over the past 5 years. The following week, I moved out of my studio apartment and into the penthouse I had owned for 2 years, but never been able to live in. I traded my Toyota Camry for the Tesla Model S that matched my actual preferences. And I started wearing clothes that reflected my real status rather than my cover identity. The transition from invisible CEO to public figure was challenging but liberating. For the first time in 5 years, I could attend industry conferences as myself rather than as a fake operations coordinator. I could speak at Harvard about entrepreneurship. I could mentor young women who wanted to start their own companies. 6 months later, when Meridian Technologies was named to the Fortune Fastest Growing Companies list, I was invited back to Harvard Business School to deliver the keynote address at their entrepreneurship conference. The same classmates who had mocked me for living paycheck to paycheck were in the audience, watching as I discussed building a billion-dollar company before age 30. The most important lesson I learned, I told the audience of current students and alumni, is that success doesn't always look the way people expect it to. Sometimes the most successful people are the ones who appear to be struggling because they're reinvesting everything they have into building something bigger than immediate gratification. I looked directly at my former classmates in the audience. And sometimes the person you're pitying for their modest lifestyle is actually building an empire that will outlast all of your corporate positions combined. The invisible CEO experiment taught me everything I needed to know about genuine achievement versus the appearance of success. While my classmates had been focused on impressive titles and salaries, I had been focused on creating something that would change entire industries. Sometimes the person living paycheck to paycheck is actually worth more than everyone laughing at them combined. And sometimes the best revenge is becoming so successful that Forbes magazine calls to confirm your status as the youngest female Fortune 500 CEO in history. The business world has a sense of irony about assumptions like that.